Welcome to the April 3rd, 2025 meeting of the Southborough Historical Commission. I'm calling the meeting to order at 7:01 p.m. And noting that beside myself present, we have Grant Farrington, Michelle Hokinson, and Kelly O'Brien, and we're going to get right to it. The first thing I have on the agenda was to approve a couple sets of meeting minutes, one of which is critical and one of which is not. Fortunately, the critical one was ready to go by the intrepid Grant. The other one can wait. And we'll post draft minutes. The non-critical one was February 20th, which is, I know Grant's working on it. We'll post draft minutes until we can approve those at our next meeting so that we stay um, in the good graces of the clerk's office. But the one that we have to address now is March 26th. That was the meeting last week, the brief meeting to take the required votes for the Community Preservation Commission pursuant to the CPC application for the fencing. Ah, Annie, what a surprise. Thank you. So Annie's here as well. So now we're up to 5. Fantastic.
Hey, Annie.
So yeah, we're working on these March 26 minutes. They went out. Grant had sent them to me and I had done a pass. And then I think Grant, you had circulated the one. I had one edit.
Yeah.
One tiny edit.
And I, just for those who don't know, I took Kevin's language, who had written, you had written the motions previously, Kevin, right? So I just took that language exactly, essentially, for the motions themselves.
Right. So I'm good with them. Does anybody have any further edits on those minutes? They were largely just the exact verbatim motions that by which we, voted to support the fencing article. Any further edits on that?
I'll just say, I did not have a chance to read them, but I wasn't at that meeting anyway, so I will be abstaining from voting on that matter. So, hopefully it doesn't matter that I haven't had a chance to read them.
Okay. So then it's up to Michelle or Kelly if you had any edits further. No?
No edits.
Okay. Great. So does somebody want to make a motion to approve the meeting minutes of March 26, 2025?
Oh, actually, Kevin, sorry. I was just looking at them again. Annie, I don't think I realized that you weren't there, so I think I have you as being present. So we should just, if we can approve them with changing members present, Annie Pfaff, to not present instead.
No, Annie, actually, I think you were present on the March 26th. That was the one last week, just to vote the seat. It was Michelle that was missing.
Yes.
Am I right?
That's correct.
Totally blanking.
Yeah.
Was I there?
Yeah, you were. You were out on February 20th.
Oh, you're right. I'm mixing up the dates. Have we done those minutes yet?
No, we're
Okay.
holding on February 20th because Grant isn't ready.
Okay, but these are the ones for CPC that have to be approved quickly. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Got
Exactly.
it. Well, I will still abstain since I'm sorry I didn't get a chance to.
Okay, so then that'll the other option is that would make, assuming that Michelle has to hang out on that vote because she wasn't present, assuming we pass it, it'll be 302, which is not a problem. I can also bring those minutes up on the screen, but I think we can do it. 302 is fine. Grant, you're the CPC man.
I think that works. So we have a quorum and a majority,
Yes.
I'm assuming, would vote to approve. So
Exactly. Okay.
I think that's all the requirement is.
Okay, so someone then make the motion to approve the meeting minutes of March 26, 2025.
I will make the motion to approve those minutes for March, what? For that date,
March
26th.
March 26th.
March 26th, thank you.
Is there a
Second.
Okay, so motion made by Kelly, seconded by Grant. Roll call vote. Miller is aye. Grant?
Yes.
Annie?
Abstain.
Kelly?
Yes,
Michelle?
Abstain.
Okay, so it's 302, Grant, to approve those minutes. And can you do me a very large, solid favor and make sure that those go into the clerk's office before noon tomorrow so that they get posted? I told um, uh, Freddie Gillespie and Lisa Braccio that we would make sure that they got posted so that they were officially in the record
Sure. Yep, I'll do that.
prior to-
I'll do it tonight.
prior to ATM on Monday. So great. Thank you. And they'll be happy to hear that.
Thank
In
you.
fact, Grant, can you also send Lisa and maybe CC Freddie that we have in fact ratified, I already let them know that we voted yes, and now that we've ratified those minutes. So it will be officially in the record.
Sure.
Great. Moving on, Revolutionary War Veterans Graves marker planning. I mean, this is something we've talked about quite a bit, and I don't want to do too much on it tonight, but I do want to update you on a couple things. As you know, Sally Waters for us has done a tremendous amount of work trying to refine this list. And she's gotten it down now at, she indicated, if you recall, when she spoke to us in February, she said that, she had this upcoming meeting with David Dearborn, who's the former head genealogist of the New England Genealogical Society, during which she was going to try to get to the bottom of one that was really driving her crazy, which was the case of, for the record, Elijah Newton, who actually has a marked grave in the OBG, and whether he should in fact be on the list. He appears in Mass Soldiers and Sailors, but he was actually served in Rutland on guard duty. So it's somewhat of a murky case. Okay, welcome to the... Oh, goodness. So she said that she actually spent 2 hours last week with Mr. Dearborn and came away from that meeting quite satisfied with leaving Elijah Newton on the list of, it should be listed as, if we erect a tablet about including marked graves, that he should be included. So I see Sally's just dropped in as an attendee. And Sally, raise your hand if you want to say anything. But so Sally's done absolutely tremendous work and refined and refined and refined some more, and has gotten it down now to, she sent me just the other day what she regards as the final list, which has 34 Revolutionary War veterans in marked graves in the OBG, and 36, which is the somewhat sort of appalling number, in unmarked graves. And of course, that's the principal thing that we've been trying to rectify, with this initiative, erecting some kind of plaque or marker. I do want to go back to the fact, because here's where we're at. There are two things that have developed, I think, since the last time we spoke. Number one is when we went in for the budget request for fiscal 26, Annie and I consulted on this, and because I wanted money to get this marker and get it done. And given the fact that back in 2017, 2018, 2019, pre-COVID, the Historical Commission had a substantially larger budget that, with the suspension or hiatus of the sign program, the loss of our, you don't have a recording secretary anymore, and other factors, we had cut down to $1,000 and level funded or held that at a level 1,000 for a number of years. And we decided to go back with a request of, what was it, Annie, about 43, 4250, something, 4250. And that was intended as a one-time request so that we could expeditiously do that Boston and Worcester bridge abutment sign, which I estimate is going to cost about $500 to get modified and mounted, to do this Revolutionary War plaque in the old burial ground. And so but that was bringing us in at a percentage that certainly raised some eyebrows, both on select board and advisory, and justly so, because it was a very high percentage increase, going from $1,000 to $4,250. I had what I thought was a pretty elegant argument in favor of that, not the least of which that adjusted for inflation, that was only going back to numbers that we had in 2016, 2017, before I was on the commission. However, subsequent to the budget request, I was approached by a donor who has indicated that they want to fund in full the marker in the OBG, and gave me an upper limit dollar amount that is well in excess of what I asked for. The donor has asked me for now to keep their name confidential, but while I intend to respect that request. That said, I have every reason to believe that this is not a phantom. This is a very solid, reliable individual, well known to me. And so, based on that, and it was connected to the questions that again justly arose at a particular select board meeting over this. I spoke with the select board chair, Ms. Cook, and indicated that I wanted to reduce the budget request back down to $1,500. That would account for the $1,000 that we had gotten last year and the year before, plus $500 to deal with that Boston and Worcester sign. More on that later. So that's where we're at money-wise. And just so if you see it come up at town meeting on Monday, that's what I was doing, and I had to act fast. And again, I have very, very high confidence in the reliability of our donor, and I'm very grateful to that person. And there'll be more to come as time goes on. And I know it feels weird for me to have to not sort of tell you, but that was the request. And so again, I'm going to honor it. So that puts us in a good position to go forward. Sally's got the list complete. Again, 34 marked, 36 unmarked. At this point, I think she's pretty rock solid in the list. So the question now is, what do we do? And how do we execute the idea? And I did have a conversation with our donor about what would be the proper form. If you recall, the original pitch and how this got rolling in the first place from the gentleman from the Massachusetts Sons of the American Revolution, the MASSAR folks, was for a sign that was going to list all the Revolutionary War vets in the OBG. That was the pitch. And where that sort of arrangement or deal with the MASSAR fellows started to fall apart was when I indicated that because the burials in Southborough were centralized and because we had a ton of actually unmarked graves, to account for all the war vets in the OBG was going to be a big list. And when I told him it could approach 80 names, now our final count now is 70 on the button. When I told him it could approach 80, and early iterations of Sally's list were longer, he got cold feet and he said it was going to be too expensive and we couldn't do it. And that's why we ended up in the position we ended up in. So we had to sort of pivot and figure out another way to get it done. So again, now we have the money, but we have to figure out how to do it. However, what I want to propose to the commission is that we have a couple ways we could go. And I did have some relatively brief discussion with our donor on this subject, is that the main point, I think, of what we're trying to do here And I don't, let me just preface this by saying my thoughts are not locked in at this point. I'm very, very questing and open-minded about the subject, but the 34 in marked graves are in marked graves, and they're marked. You know what I mean? They're the the headstones are there. They get, they have the little marker, veterans marker, and Sally's done a separate list on that subject. But just to keep it simple for now, those graves are marked. They have the markers. They get the little flags put in, every year by the VSOs, who do a fantastic job, and they're already acknowledged. The thing that Massar was doing was, again, listing everybody. And because we have such a high number of unmarked graves, I put it to you that we might want to consider a marker or monument that only, again, I'm not locked in, but that only lists the unmarked graves, because those are the ones right now that got nothing, right? And there are a lot of different ways to do this. The Massar proposal was for a freestanding. Let me bring this up and show it to you just to give you a reminder of the kind of conditions that we're talking about. I gotta share my screen. If you bear with me a second. Okay, let's get that off of there. And this is the sign that Massar put up in the cemetery that's in the center of Marlborough. And that's basically what he was proposing for us. And, all of those names, to the best of my knowledge, because I spent quite a bit of time in that cemetery, are in marked graves. And you see, I believe there's only, what, 3, 6, 9, 10, like 30 names on that list. And again, if we included everybody, we've got 70. If it was just the unmarked graves, it would be 36. But there are other ways to skin the cat here. And actually, I chatted with Sally about this the other day, and she sent me a few examples of things that she came up with, and I've come up with a few more. So I'll just very quickly show you. Like, this is a plaque they have in Sterling. This is dedicated, I believe, to a single veteran. There are, this is an interesting one. This is in the Cincinnati area where they put a bronze plaque on a stone. And actually, this is interesting because they had apparently amended the list, and those are additions flanking the main plaque. I don't particularly find that one that prepossessing, but I thought I'd show it to you. Here's one that's in Ohio, another bronze plaque. This one interested me. This is in South Dennis, New Jersey, where this is to a single individual, but a small obelisk like this, especially if polished on all 4 sides, could easily contain 36 names. And part of the discussion I had with a potential donor, they indicated that they would be interested in this kind of a stone marker that was more in keeping with what you typically find in a graveyard anyway. So that's something for us to consider. Here's another one that done in a more rustic way. This is a bronze plaque that's, inset into a stone in a graveyard. This is in Malden, by the way, where they put up another marker in Malden that was to honor Black Revolutionary War veterans who had served in Malden. There were quite a few. It was a very interesting story. And to remind you of site conditions there, this is the Google Street View. Of course, you're on St. Mark Street looking in at the main gate of the OBG. And part of my concern about markers and marking is that, down the hill to the right in this photo, you've got the All Wars Memorial. We've got lots and lots of signs, street signs, road signs, the common street signs, the Burke Square sign, which is down by the All Wars Memorial. And there's a lot of signage at the library, the story walk, which, you guys know this, at
Mhm.
the depths of that photo on the other side of that stone wall, there's markers there. And there is some concern about marker pollution. And I would remind you that there are already, as you walk in the gate here and walk straight toward the flagpole, there are already 2 markers present in the OBG. One is this one. That's a standing stone. And if you look, you see where my cursor is? Can you all see that?
Yes.
That's what is the inset here. It's right in front of the flagpole. And you can it says Oldie Burial Grounds. This tablet was erected in 1995 in memory of the members of early generations of the town who were buried here in graves marked and unmarked between 1727 and 1895. So that sort of encompasses everybody and just is a marker for the site. But then at the base of the flagpole, like right behind that stone, like right at the base again of this flagpole, there's already this that was put in 2002 by the VSOs and this lists only the 3 Southborough residents who were actually killed during the war, as opposed to, veterans who did their service and were fortunate enough to survive. And, as Sally points out, as it turns out, none of these folks actually died of combat wounds. One was poison. The other 2 died of illness, service connected, obviously. But so my point, though, is that we've already got a bronze inset marker. We've got another marker at the base, but none of those quite, of course, address the injustice that we're trying to address here, which is, in my mind, you could list all 70 Revolutionary War vets and you could differentiate, with some sort of little symbol. These ones are in marked graves. These are ones in unmarked graves. But to my mind, the injustice here is the 36 that have no marker, right? So, and again, I see in my mind where we have a lot of options. There could be a plaque. Imagine, a high quality bronze plaque similar to our National Register plaques that would be in a pole about right here where my cursor's moving. In other words, right at the gate. Or there could be some kind of marker similar to the one that just describes the cemetery itself, inset into a stone, and several examples of which I showed you. Or there could be a small granite obelisk, and so on. And I'm trying to be really open-minded about this subject at this point. And again, the donor has indicated an openness and an interest actually in a stone marker or something fairly modest that would blend in with the existing landscape. The other thing that we have to be mindful of is, in terms of placement, as I think you all know, there's a very persuasive argument that there are graves that are outside the walls, particularly in that area moving toward the common. But even in placing something on the inside perimeter of the stone walls, that we want to make sure that we're not putting it on top of somebody. You know what I mean? So it's a really tricky situation. Now, down in that, what is it? The southeast corner closest to the library. My understanding is that's an area that became essentially a place where a lot of stones were dumped or filled. So I think we could work that out, but that's where we're at. And I just wanted to get, if you folks, I think what I would like to do is ask all of you to come back to the next meeting with some ideas about what you'd like to see, and And again, I'd like to have a further conversation with our donor. I'd like to do some more research myself. I know Sally's poking around and looking, but I mean, in terms of best examples, what could we do that would be tasteful, that would not contribute to the, is sensitive to the notion of sign pollution down there? Or, but the other option is simply to go back to the kind of very handsome, and to my mind, I mean, those bronze plaques we put up for the National Register, I just think look so fantastic, and they harmonize so well, and I think in every location. So I don't think putting up something like that would be obnoxious, but I do think we should consider the alternatives. So does anybody have any thoughts on that? Or
Yes. I actually, Kevin, I just wanted to say something that this is very appropriate that we're doing that this year, for the 250th celebration for the for the American Revolution. But I also kind of disagree with you. I feel that we should have all of the soldiers together because obviously 70 men from a town like Southborough is really, I mean, it's it's really amazing to me that there were 70 people that actually fought in the American Revolution. So I kind of feel like it's more of a statement when you see all of them together. And, right. I mean, that's just my opinion. I just think that it would be really nice to have all 70 of them together.
I think that's
Sort of
yeah.
one, I mean, it's unification.
Yeah, I'm utterly fine with that, actually. I just, again, the big injustice are the unmarks.
Yes, I
But
agree.
if we can, and this is why I need help from you folks in terms of research and design, because if there's a tasteful, thoughtful way that we can get, all 70, I had gone through in my head, like, if they were listed alphabetically, would you have a symbol or do you put a double-sided, let's say if it was a bronze plaque, double-sided, where side A was those who were in marked graves herein, in the OBG, and the other side would be the unmarked graves. I just don't, or an obelisk, that you could get all those names onto, and again, make some indication of, which is which.
Mhm.
Yeah, I'm totally open to 70. It's more expensive, but again, the number the donor gave me was higher, than anything that I had asked for. So, um, Kelly, it seemed like you were agreeing with Michelle that you want to see all 70 on there.
Yes, I think that'd be a great idea. I agree with Michelle.
Okay.
And I like what you said about kind of the bronze, like how you have the historical signs around town. I think it'd be kind of cool to match them, but we can go more deeper into that. I mean,
Yeah, I mean, there is a, a kind of argument to keep, and the vendor that we've used, does such beautiful work. And I have to say, I mean, I've had occasion now to really look hard at various bronze signs, and I haven't seen any that are of a higher grade than the ones that we got. So, um, yeah, Annie, what's your thought?
Just in terms of the like the format, I really think that we should weigh heavily the donor's preference on the style. I think that's really good stewardship of the donation, and as long as it's not something like wildly inappropriate, which it doesn't sound like any of these ideas are. I think that if the donor has a preference, that should be strongly weighed in terms of our how we move forward.
Right. And if we could figure out, for instance, their interest, I would say, if I had to attempt to characterize it, was probably more towards something like a large, similar to what's there to describe the OBG in general, like a large piece granite, stone that would be inset with a bronze marker. So you'd have to carry a large stone into the OBG, find the appropriate place for it, and then they put in like the plaque would be set into the stone, which would certainly be a lot less obtrusive, than something on a pole. So Grant, any
Sorry, I was on mute. First, I think it's great news about the mystery donor. I think that's excellent. I agree with Michelle. I like the idea of kind of uniting all 70 names, even though, you know, uh, I'm also interested in kind of not minimizing, but really making sure that it's not obstructing the view of the old burial ground or, that kind of thing. So I'm really sensitive to the sign pollution argument there. But, I think essentially the unmarked graves have been separated from the, in our memory, at least in our collective memory, from the marked graves for so long that it would be quite nice to kind of unite them all and see them in all in one place again. In terms of the style, I kind of agree with Annie. I think giving some weight to the donor's preference, I would be amenable to a stone or, with the inset. I'm not sure I'm crazy about the idea of mounting it on a pole right there, at the kind of the entrance. But to be honest, I haven't explored all the options about, an obelisk or other things I just haven't thought of. So I guess where I'm at is I'm leaning towards all the names and looking to kind of minimize the presence or, reduce it in some way.
Yeah, and for instance, when Annie and I sort of worked out our budget pitch, that much higher number, that was based on my best guess, and I had been pretty good at guessing what those signs would cost. I've got some experience with it now. That was based on a bronze plaque with 70 names on it. And I had talked to the Franklin Bronze people, for instance, to get a kind of ballpark of that. I suspect doing a plaque like that and insetting it into a large stone is going to be considerably more expensive than putting it on a pole. So I also don't want to I'm going to go back to the donor and have some discussion with them, and because I don't want to scare them off and you know what I mean? So this person comes forward and makes a very generous offer, and suddenly we're building like a Nicolas Cage mausoleum. It's the cost is ballooned. I mean, we have to be careful about that. So what I will do that, but in the meantime, I would really, I'm going to give you some homework, people. I want you to go out and do some research independently, everybody, and come back with a couple of examples of what you think is a good practice here. I mean, the stuff I just showed you, Sally pulled together, in a day, and I was doing some more looking this afternoon, but I think we could do better. And then we can start pricing this out, but we got to move this forward because this is dragged out way too long. So, let's get her done. I think we've had a big breakthrough though, because Sally has, again, a definitive, conclusive, I'm done, it's ready to go list. And so now we know the number. Now we have a donor. We have a path forward. We just have to figure out how to do it tastefully. So that's your marching order for our next meeting. Everybody come in with a couple of examples of what you want, or send it to me in advance so I can collate it and look it over, and we'll, and I'd like to have some things as quick as possible to be able to show to our potential donor and say, this is what we're thinking about. What do you think? So, okay, let's table that at this point. Next item is historic house sign application for 24 East Main, and this is another one that's dragging along. We talked about this in February, if you recall. This is a house at 24 East Main. It's too closer to the center of town from the lovely Mansard at 28th that we gave a house sign to, and there's a house sign across the street. In fact, I believe that's 25. The sticking point with this house, this was a house built, it's circa 1880. I'm sorry, circa 1890. Um, and the tricky part of it was in the Macris, in the individual report for 24 East Main, the house is listed circa 1890 as the C.B. Wilson House. In the area report for East Southborough Center, which has a more, an extensive write-up on the area, the house is listed with no name, but number 26, which is next door, it's the next house to the east on East Main Street, is listed as the Charles B. Wilson House. In other words, C.B. Wilson. And that house was built circa 1880, so about a decade before the subject house, the requesting house. So you've got a problem where on the individual report, the house that the people that want the sign, 26, their house is known as the C.B. Wilson House. In the individual report, in the area report, it's not known as anything, but the house next door is known as the Charles B. Wilson House. And so, you'd like not to be in this situation where you had two adjacent houses. One is C.B. Wilson, one is Charles B. Wilson. It is entire, and so what do we know? I know from the reports that Charles B. Wilson was a carriage painter, for the record. And I've done enough deed research in the Worcester County Registry of Deeds website, which is, as Annie knows, is difficult with an old house. But I've done enough to know that Charles Wilson had his hand in a hell of a lot of real estate transactions in that period. Beyond that, I was unable to go. And that's fairly typical. If it could be done really easily, the Macris people would have done it because they were more expert at it than I am. So Kelly, go ahead.
Thank you, Kevin. If you're questioning the ownership of the house, which is kind of how I'm understanding what you're saying, maybe we can look at an old map again, like we did before at that house on Oak Hill.
Yeah, they came actually in the Macris. They note that they were taking it off an 1898 atlas. That's a handwritten note in the Macris report. So yeah, you might get somewhere looking at that, and please do if you think it would advance the cause. I have a feeling that. Well, I talked to the owner. I had some trouble getting in touch with them, and finally did, and they indicated that they didn't know any further. I always ask the question, have you done deed research? Would you do deed research? And typically, here's the challenge that we have with this stuff, right? In an ideal world, and this happens, quite often, somebody puts in the request, you go to the Macris report, and the data's all there. And it's a pretty easy call. You look at the condition of the house, you look at the research that's been done, the date, done, and he does up a beautiful design. We vote, we get the thing made, and everybody's happy. The tricky part is stuff like this, where there's no name. And you remember the one over in the west side of town, the Brigham Pond area, where I had and my long-suffering wife had done just hours and hours and hours, just because we kind of made it a personal cause. And our stated position is we don't do that. But sometimes I think to myself, this is why the Nantucket Historical Commission charges $1,200 for one of these signs, because they do the research. You know what I mean? Like, and you get a report, most of it's drawn right off the Macris. But it's really hard, and it's really time consuming. So, I don't know if anybody has any brilliant thoughts about this, and I'm not looking to remake the policy right now, but I must say it does become, again, I've got quite a bit of time invested in this, trying to figure it out. And ultimately, there might not be a definitive answer. It is entirely possible, and indeed likely that Charles B. Wilson and his adjacent properties own both. Built the first house in the circa 1880, lived in it, and built the second one in 1890, or sold the lot, or built a newer house in 1890 at 24 East Main and moved into it, and sold number 26. And I think that's the most likely possibility. But so I'm a little bit here. The other factor I'll throw in the interest of just moving this along, is when I was speaking to the owner of number 24, who's requesting the house, she indicated that number 26 is in fact a rental. That house is number 26 is sort of much altered. It has a number of apartments in it, apparently, and said to me, I don't know what weight to give this, but she felt it was unlikely, because I explained the dilemma that we were in, that she felt it was unlikely that that owner was going to ask for a historic house or house sign at any point. Does that make sense? Sorry for the ringing phone in the background. I gotta end that. So the one alternative is simply to go with what's in the Macros report, vote on and approve the C.B. Wilson house circa 1890, and move on in the confidence that it is highly unlikely, because I agree with the applicant, that number 26 is going to come forward. So we might not even would spend a lot of time running around kind of pointlessly. So that's where we're at. Again, I'm open to suggestion. Or if somebody wants to take this on as a project and start digging, try to do better than I managed to do.
Kevin, I have a thought, not necessarily for this sign, but just going forward. I know that for I think it was the Josiah Fay house over on Chestnut Hill, right? We kind of ran into that issue with, do we name it just after Josiah Fay, or do we, add, I think it was Mary, right? Josiah and Mary Fay.
Yeah.
If I'm not mistaken. And that got me thinking about, why do we have to name the house after the first person, the person who built it, right? And so, I think at that time we were kind of considering maybe there was a long time resident of the house or that kind of thing who, might be not necessarily more deserving, but you could also name it after them, that kind of thing. So I think if we kind of get into that, if we're interested in that, then that could kind of widen our options a bit. Because I think what we're kind of running into here, and I think also on, was it Newton Street or the Newton House over, was it East Charles Newton or something like that over in, I can't remember if it was East Main or Newton Street or something like that, that like this was essentially the 19th century equivalent of like developers, right? They would own 5 houses and they would all be named after them in the Macros. And
Yeah.
I think we're kind of running into issues with naming on that. So maybe just getting more creative with who we're naming it after.
Well, yeah, that Josiah and Mary Fay house, you remember he was the guy that was killed during the Revolution, and that his widow he only lived in the house a short time, but his widow lived there another 50 years.
Yeah.
And the owner felt very strongly that her name deserved to be on the plaque as much as her husband, and we all entirely agreed. I think that was to me an easier one than here, where we just don't know clearly. Again, you could just go with the Macros. My experience has been, in general, I had that one, what I thought was a big win. Marcy and I, getting to the bottom of that one over in the Brigham Pond area you remember it was a Ward Road. That was a case where the Macros didn't have the name, but we found it. And I thought very convincingly. I spent a lot of your time explaining the research. But as a general rule, the architectural consultants that did the report, around 2000, if they could get the information, they got it, So, Kelly, did you have something else? No? Okay. So what, what do you want to do? We can defer this to our next meeting. I suggested that I explained to the applicant that it could be done online, that it was challenging um, and rather tedious, and they might have more luck going in person to the Worcester Registry, and you kind of throw yourself at their mercy, and they they tend to be helpful, but you can't do it by phone. But that didn't get a lot of traction. So it's, again, you could approve, since it's CB Wilson, in the individual report. I mean, I would be fine going with that. But, again, you've got the Charles B. Wilson House in the area macro support next door. And it's funny, in the individual report for 26, it's also called Jennison House, but without really any documentation. Again, just in a note, handwritten note at the end. So those individual reports tend to be handwritten with a typed cover sheet. So you don't know, when that information, with a handwritten portion, you don't know when it was jotted down or quite how credible it is. So I can kick it back to the owner. I'm not sure, and I appreciate the difficulty of an owner trying to struggle through that themselves, who doesn't have experience doing it. One of us can take it on and try to press a little harder. I mean, I didn't spend nearly the time on this one that I spent on that one on Ward Road. I just didn't have the bandwidth, frankly. Or we could approve CB Wilson circa 1890. Any thoughts, Vice Chair? Anything on this?
I personally don't have the bandwidth to do the research, but my gut is telling me it might be deserving of a little bit more before we approve CB Wilson as is. But that being said, I'm not able to take it on, so I don't know where that leaves it.
Well, Kelly, you did that nice job. You got to the bottom of that Oak Hill Roadhouse for us.
Thank you. I actually just looked on a map from 1898, and
Yeah.
it did say it was C. Wilson.
Mm.
So,
Yeah, that comports with, the Charles B. Wilson. Again, he was a carriage painter, which is a kind of a really vanished occupation.
But yeah, if you want me to do a little more dirt digging, I certainly can do that.
Can you? I think we would appreciate it. The owner would appreciate it. And let's say if we get to the next meeting and you haven't had a breakthrough, we'll take up the CB Wilson. I think that would be a reasonable time to vote, but a little more digging. I appreciate that very much.
My pleasure.
All right, so let's move on. I'm going to be quick. The common fencing CPC application at annual town meeting. Again, we are the co-sponsors. We, voted in support. And then, we've ratified that vote tonight, or, memorialized the minutes tonight. Andrew Dennington, who is, the lead from the select board, and this has asked me to sort of come up and, help him present, because we're going to present this at town meeting. So I'll go up and make a few remarks about what we know historically about the fence, and it really is rather interesting, and share some figures. And that fence, the more I look at it, the more I realize how important it is. The way it sort of embraces it, runs from the All Wars Memorial, up and around Common Street and down, and terminating at that historic water trough from 1875 that's at the extreme western end of the common. And, and then unifying a number of historical elements within, the Civil War obelisk, the World War I artillery piece that's there, again, the water trough, the all wars. Um, so, it's interesting that, the original fence there actually was only in the area around the obelisk, and it was put up shortly after the obelisk was erected in 1866, and was all wood. And then, subsequently slowly replaced. It was a little bit of a kerfuffle with the Pilgrim Church actually over ownership of that ground. And it's sort of one of the things that the fence does is chart the evolution of what we think of as the town common from what it really was for a very long time was simply a kind of dusty crossroads. Into the manicured, thing that we know today, and when the retaining wall was built on the southern edge, and all that kind of stuff. So there are a few things that I can say. I expect Andrew will sort of take the lead in talking about the money part of it, and we hope we'll get it through. I think we have unanimous support from Select Board, unanimous support from CPC, and unanimous support from Advisory. As I understand it, at least. And so I hope we'll do all right with that. Secondly, the Rural Cemetery Water Tower. I forget where I've left you with this one, is that we have temporarily postponed that because Bill Cundiff and I had a great deal of difficulty getting an accurate bid on the roof. Subsequent to a disappointment with a contractor that came out, and I met with Bill and the contractor on site. When was that, Grant? Must have been in February, I think.
February or early March.
Yeah. And this individual, really promised to come through and then didn't, and sort of left us holding the reins. I went to work and talked to a number of people, including Wendy Frontiero, who had done the work on the Southborough Center Historic District. Fellow named Brian Pfeiffer, who runs the Archipedia New England website, is a very prominent architectural historian in Cambridge, and 40 years of managing projects all around New England. We had a very long conversation. Talked to John Parent. And finally, I through Wendy and Brian Pfeiffer's help, I ended up connecting with a fellow named Dennis Semperbon, who's a longtime instructor at the North Bennett Street School in Boston, which is sort of the premier sort of crafts person's school, I think, in New England and maybe in the country, and runs a historic restoration contracting company out of Holliston, has a great deal of experience on a lot of projects. And he's very enthusiastic and is going to come out and really try to do a comprehensive review of both the roof, and we're also going to have him look at the masonry to make sure that we get this package right. And so in consultation with the former chair, Ben Smith, and with the concurrence of now the new chair, Lisa Braccio, and the consultant, Freddie Gillespie, and Grant was involved in this. We're going to hold, it's obviously not coming forward at this town meeting, but hopefully at the next one, because I really want to make sure that we get this water tower thing done right. And my hope remains, because it's not that complicated a project, that we'll still have it complete by the tricentennial. So next item, spring summer goals. This is going to be quick. Demolition delay bylaw revisions. Grant and I were both going to do some work on that, and just haven't had the time yet. That's on my plate and on my list for the summer, and hopefully we can sort of get into that in earnest with something to go on by the fall. Kelly, where are we? Have you been able to, I know you've been busy, have you been able to do anything with the oral history project yet?
Yes, I'm glad you asked. So Michelle and I got together and we came up with like how we would open up like a small synopsis of what we're gonna what it's about. And then we would say this thing the same time, every time, I'm sorry, every time. And then we would start off with a fact. And then we would give them everyone the same 5 questions. And the questions are like, what were some of your fondest memories as a child growing up in Southborough? What were some of the Southborough traditions in the past that are no longer around? What do you remember about the landscape, stories, restaurants, etc.? Do you have any funny, scary, or exciting stories you want to pass on to residents? And what have you seen as the biggest change in your lifetime in Southborough? We also have some other questions like, what would you like to see change or come back to Southborough? So we would come up with the 5 best answers. So, I mean, questions. So if anyone wants to chime in on some, that'd be great. So everyone would get those same questions. It would be probably like a 5 or 6 minute interview, unless they went on and on with their stories, which would be great. And that would be it. So I wanted to read those to everyone before I went on to the next level of reaching out publicly.
I like them. I mean, I like the questions. I think, and I also wonder if they grew up in Southborough. Tell me about school, which is such a big thing,
Okay, that's a great one.
That is a good one, Kevin.
Okay. How would you prefer me to word that?
I have no preference, I think open-ended. I have a feeling if you dangle that in front of people, I mean, if you ask me that question, I have things to say about, when we moved to New England, arriving at Peasley Elementary in the 4th grade and the first friends I made, I still remember all that, So yeah, yeah, just a suggestion,
You know what? I do know there was a teacher, she was up on Oak Hill. I forgot, was it Mrs. Finn, Miss Finn or Neri? She used to change the kids' last names.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, my mother's, well, my uncle, his last name was Hempel, and she changed it to Le because she liked it better.
Oh, wow.
So,
Yeah.
yeah, like those
That would
funny
not
stories.
fly in 2025, but those were the days, right? Yeah, no, I like it. I mean, I don't know if Annie or Grant or and Michelle, you were involved in this. So if you two have Annie and Grant anything to add, or I
No, I
was
think they're great. I think they're great questions. I'm not sure if you had this one, but like what uh what's the biggest change that's happened in town since you've been here? I can't remember if that was one of the
That was
the later
what
ones that
have
you
you
had.
seen as the biggest change
Oh,
in
okay, you
your
have.
lifetime in Southborough?
Okay, there you go. So yeah, I don't have anything to add then.
I'd like to hear too, Kelly, as I'd like to hear the people answer this question. What did you do for fun?
Oh,
Because
okay,
Mischief.
what did they do for fun? Okay, that's a great one.
like it's like, um because it touches on, how people entertain themselves. I mean, and I always think of that Southborough used to have I always lament the fact that we have so much water in Southborough and no place to swim within town, unless you have a pool. But there used to be public
Yeah,
swim, on off Central Street there you know what I mean? And so be interesting to hear people comment.
yeah, I know back in the early 1900s, their big thing was plays and my grandparents doing minuets. Is that what they're called?
Right.
But plays at the Fabletown Hall. So
Right. Which maybe there will be someday again. But yeah, no, I'm thank you. I'm so glad to hear. I didn't want to put pressure on you too, because we haven't had a chance to chat, but I'm delighted to know that you're moving forward. Annie, do you have anything to add to this? Or
I don't know. I think it sounds great, and I'm very appreciative to Kelly and Michelle for your work on this. I think it's a really exciting and neat initiative.
One thing, if you don't mind, I'd like to just recite what Michelle and I came up with. Like I said, we would start off with an introductory thing. And so it would start off with, this is a project created by the Southborough Historical Commission. History is not just artifacts, documents, and old structures. It's also memories, people, and the stories behind them. Southborough, and then, like I said, we'd say one small fact. Like this fact would be Southborough started off originally being part of Marlborough, but broke off in 1727 because the distance was too long to go to church. Like just a small little fact that was like, hey, I didn't know that. You know, one of those kind of things. So that would not that fact, but this project is by the Historical Commission, and about the stories behind them, that would be the same blurb every time,
right.
followed by a little factoid.
That's great, I think.
Yeah, I'm happy. I'm happy. I'd say full speed ahead, you know.
All
Yeah.
right,
And thank you both. Yeah.
we will continue our mission.
Get after it. All right, so good. The only other thing that I have on the goals is we gotta, you know, obviously this Revolutionary War thing is really preoccupying me. But the other smaller project is that doggone Boston and Maine sign. Just to remind you what that thing is. I do this real quick. It's this thing. This is a picture of when it was sitting over at the flag school. The society people had it sitting there for ages and ages and ages, apparently. I don't know when this doggone thing was made. It's, for the record, it's 24 1/8 inches wide by 15 1/8 tall. It's pretty hefty. It's currently residing in my basement. I've had to move it several times, and it weighs a ton. The problem, as you recall, is that this thing was built, it's got in the back, I don't have a photo of the back of it, but it's got like 4 like screw holes that it was sort of originally conceived, I think, to mount on the granite abutments, which makes no sense because you'd have to alter or mar them to be able to mount the doggone thing, and which, you know, you don't vandalize a historic artifact in order to put a marker on it. You know, it just doesn't make any sense. So we've got to get that thing altered so that it can be pole mounted. And I haven't had a chance yet to talk to what I think of as our preferred vendor, if they've got something that will do this, or if I have to find a welding shop to sort of alter the back. But that's where we're at on that. I know the ideal location to erect this sign if we can ever get it. You know, if I just need to find some time to get that taken care of. I don't think it'll take that long. Now we're on to scheduling a next meeting. I would propose Tuesday, May 6th. How does that work for people? It's about 4.5 weeks. Work
That works
for
for me.
Okay, Michelle, Grant, Annie, how's that for you?
Yep, it should work for me.
Yeah, at 7, that works.
Yeah, okay, Tuesday, May 6th it is. Thank you so much. There's no other business. Is there any public comment? Oh, Sally left, so it's just us. The hot time tonight is select board advisory. So with that said, we could have a motion to adjourn. Note, my friends, this is the second shortest meeting we've ever had. 65 minutes.
I just looked at the clock. It's only 8.
Yeah. Hurry. Somebody motion to adjourn.
Kevin, it's not quite as good as the 9-minute meeting last time.
I know. Well,
The
Still,
YouTube video did come in under 10 minutes on that one.
Really, I'm
One
still
other
pretty
thing,
pleased.
one other thing before we adjourn, I'd just like to express gratitude to the anonymous donator.
Mhm.
So,
Yeah, me too. I'm very happy. And yeah, that'll all work out. And I hate to have to be coy about it, but there are reasons.
It's completely understood.
Yeah, and
and
I think
I'm
it'll
sure we
come
all
out.
appreciate you being respectful to us.
Mhm.
Yeah, and I think in due time that'll come forward, and you'll be able to say, tell this person thank you in person. But yeah, I appreciate the sentiment. So
Perfect
motion to
timing.
adjourn. Anybody?
Motion
make
to
the
adjourn.
motion. Oh,
Yeah.
Michelle, you do.
All right, Michelle, you got it. Somebody second?
Second.
Okay. Motion by Michelle to adjourn, seconded by Grant. Roll call vote. Miller's aye. Annie?
Yes.
Grant?
Yes.
Michelle?
Yes.
Ellie?
Yes.
5-0. 8:06.
Nice
Make
work.
note. Make note.
Kevin, you
Thank
are
you,
on
Fred.
fire.
Yeah.
And thank you, Annie. I know it was tough for you to get here tonight.
Yeah,
I
no,
didn't
it's fine.
expect to see you.
I ended up getting a babysitter. Sophia Baldelli's here, which is great. So
Oh, good. Okay. Well, I appreciate the effort. Thank you so much. See ya, everybody.
Great.
Good
Thanks,
night.
everyone. Good to see you.
At
Night.
annual town meeting, I hope.
Yes.
All right.
Yes.
Yes.
Take care. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.